County Civic Federation and the chairman of the Transportation Committee. We've been asked and challenged by the county executive, Ike Leggett, to see if we could come up with a better proposal that would help implement mass transit better mass transit services for the residents of the county, and if we could do it at a significantly lower cost. We took up the challenge. We're still working on a report. Our intent was to have a report basically when the county executive report is finalized. There'll be a public meeting on September 30th, starting at 6 p.m. They did invite the public to sign up over a period of weeks, but somehow all 50 slots were taken by 10 a.m. in the morning when they made the announcement. Working with Jim, we've prepared a slideshow for tonight, and we're going to try to go over what we think is happening with the ITA. We have an expert in the back of the room who's done a lot of work on transportation in this county, and is probably one of the few people who've actually helped significantly improve the amount of roads that we have in Montgomery County by specifically getting the Inter-County Connector built. I'd now like to introduce Jim Zepp, and myself will be glad to answer as many questions as we can.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate the time here this evening. First I wanted to make clear is that I'm an actual transit user. I carry two smart trip cards, the regular issue as well as the Obama commemorative one. So sometimes when I talk, people are, oh, you're just against transit. No, I'm against wasteful and inefficient transit projects, but I think that if effectively used, that transit can benefit our communities and provide an important resource. Let's see, to begin with this, I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about the BRT and RTA backgrounds, because some of you may not be familiar with that topic. And once you kind of have an understanding of what the significance of those projects are, the budgetary tax impacts that will affect our county and taxpayers, and finally some of the alternatives to what's being proposed, and give you a sense of what could be done there as well. As we go through these issues, what I'd like you to do is to keep in mind these four questions. What are the costs? Who benefits? Who pays? And what are the alternatives? Because there's a lot of complicated stuff, but basically this is what it boils down to in terms of the kinds of decisions that are being made here. And a lot of this is not only sort of the costs involved, but who's going to be bearing these costs as far as the various groups within the county, who's benefiting, etc. So that these are kind of very important concepts. As far as the BRT ITA background, just wanted to start out here by saying that right now there's lots of transportation alternatives, pretty much what everybody knows, from privately owned vehicles to various rental things, car sharing, bikes, hitchhiking, walking, and telecommuting is also a significant aspect now in terms of a lot of people don't even need to travel to get to work, or they don't even need to travel to shop. Just go to Amazon or whatever. Mass transit alternatives, again, there's a whole range of alternatives that we face there. Going from heavy rail, which most people know in this area as Metro Rail, light rail proposed for the Purple Line, streetcar trolley. There's the somewhat ill-starred DC 8th Street streetcar that hasn't been able to sort of get up and running. BRT, such as the WMATA Crystal City Metroway, which is the only true BRT in the region, which happens to be operated by WMATA, and the enhanced express bus service. An example of that is the WMATA K9 route that runs on New Hampshire Avenue between the FDA and Fort Todd. So we have a number of different examples of what even mass transit means right here in the DC area. I haven't even gotten to the exotic stuff like monorail, but hey, if you're Simpsons fans, you've seen that. Anyway, so the transit project considerations, it's balancing these three concerns. Cost, relative cost anyway, service capacity, service demand determinants such as the frequency, which get picked up, access and convenience, and overall trip travel times. And a lot of times this gets overlooked because one of the things for people who actually use the bus, regardless of how fast the bus travels, a big question for a lot of people is how long you have to wait at the bus stop. Currently, like for our ride-on buses, that's generally about a half an hour for most times. So even if you do get a slightly faster travel speed, for a lot of people, it's more the misery of standing there with the cars and trucks whipping past you. And like tonight, the conditions here are getting hit with rain from the cars going by. Sometimes where I'm waiting and whatnot, you have hubcaps flying off the cars at me because it's at a curve. I've had boxes of books come flying off vehicles. So anyway, there's those kinds of issues. Access and convenience. This is one of the things, again, that you can be providing transportation service, but it's like internet or cable service and whatnot. You can have the fastest backbone in the world, but if you're not connecting to your customer's home or office or whatever, it's what they call the last mile. It's inaccessible and it's inconvenient. And that is one of the major problems with transit, is that it's far more convenient to jump in your car in your driveway and drive somewhere than have to go a quarter mile, half mile, whatever, to the bus stop and then wait the half hour there or whatever, which all then contributes to this idea of the overall trip travel times. So even though transit vehicles may be traveling fast, it's that overall time it takes you to get from your house to the bus stop or whatever, and from the bus to like the metro station downtown. And I have some neighbors that have to take 2 lines of metro to get to their office, so it can be a considerable amount of time, energy, and everything else to do the entire trip. And that's one of the things that one of the people who writes a lot on transportation issues, Jarrett Walker, says is one of the problems or fallacies in terms of transit planning, that most people only focus on it as if they were driving a car, not all these multiple segments and all these inconveniences that they have to go through to use that kind of transit. So, some of the BRT projects that are under study, so that you're aware of them, is that currently there's a BRT plan for Route 355, Rockville Pike. It'd be a total of about 14 miles, going from Bethesda on out to, I think what it's called, Seneca Shopping Center, something like that.
It's in Clarksburg.
Clarksburg, yeah. And the Rockville Metro is kind of the midpoint, so they have like a north and a south leg to that. Viersville, which is about 6.16 miles. Route 29 is also broken up into 2 segments, from Burtonsville south to White Oak, and then from White Oak on down to the Silver Spring Metro Center. It's combined about 11-mile distance there. And then you have finally the Corridor Cities Transit Way, Phase 1, which is about 9 miles. There's about another 6 miles in a Phase 2 for that one. So as you can see, these are fairly extensive transit projects that are not even bringing in the Purple Line, which is another major transit project that the county has on its list of things to do. In addition to that, with Route 355 and CCT, there are Phase 2 extensions to those routes. What was it for Route 355? It would be continuing from Bethesda Metro down to Friendship Heights. As at the CCT, it would be about another 6 miles. Phase 2 also for the BRT is probably being purchased about 65 more BRT vehicles, which are a cost about $1.2 million each. So that's not insubstantial in itself. As well as there are 5 more BRT routes: Randolph Road, University Boulevard, Georgia Avenue, I'm sorry, yeah, New Hampshire Avenue, and with what West Bethesda, North Bethesda Transit, yeah. So those are also in what's called the Countywide Transit Corridors Functional Master Plan. All of this stuff. So we're facing some fairly major projects with all of this. We start totaling it all up. To give you a sense, here's a map that shows all of these different projects. The 3 major ones, of course, are the one on Rockville Pike, which is the dark blue line right here, goes on down. And then there's the Veers Mill, which is the yellow line right here, and the Colesville Road, Route 29, that goes from downtown Silver Spring up to Burtonsville. Then there's also the yellow line up here in the north, which is the CCT. And then you have the purple line going across here, over to Prince George's County, as well as then you have the other 5 BRT routes. So it kind of gives you an idea of what the coverage is here in the county. Pretty big. I served as a member since April of the county's transit task force, which studied the financing for the 3 BRT routes that are sort of being currently studied, as well as the CCT. And these are some of the financial figures that were developed for this. Shows the estimated, the second column here, the estimated construction periods for each of these projects, so you can get a sense that for some of these, we're talking completion till probably somewhere around 2026, 2024. But with the plans in the Transit Task Force, you'll start paying for all this in 2017. So for some of this, you may not see much service for 10 years. Here are the capital costs that are estimated in 2015 dollars. It comes out to about $2.1 billion for the year of expense when they contract to start construction and whatnot. It comes out to about $2.2 billion for all of these. Maintenance facilities are figured here for the BRT routes, for grand totals, and here's a year that the service would be initiated, plus also operations and maintenance estimates, to give you a sense of the kind of money that's being discussed here. So the problem that basically we're facing is, where does the county come up with the cash for all of this? Because we pretty well maxed out our credit card as far as what we can borrow for capital improvements. We're pretty well maxed out what we spend for the operating budget. So as a result of all of this desire to build all of this stuff, the county executive proposed last year legislation in January that would create an independent transit authority, or ITA. Among the characteristics of the ITA are a board appointed by the county executive, control of the BRT and ride-on planning and operations. Those services would be done by the ITA. The ITA's capital improvements plan, operating capital budgets approved by the council. So there is some level of control or oversight by the council on those budgets. Can sell bonds, can condemn property, and enter into agreements with governments and corporations. One of the concerns that I raised with the task force is this issue about condemning property, because that will basically be considered approved through the CIP process, whereas other agencies have a far more extensive notification of property owners regarding whether or not their land is under consideration for taking for public purposes. I'm sorry,
the CIP normally is about a 3-page thing. They put a thing on there, Beers Mill Road project. They'll give a map of the project, and they will give a brief writing, a brief year of the history, and over 3 years. And oh yeah, by the way, if you happen to have property involved, we'll condemn it with no hearing or anything else like that. So that's the CIP is a 3-page, normal 3. Sometimes they're 4 pages. And those will be held on the same night as the hearings on all the public schools, additions, and everything else. The county always limits the number of people who can speak. And by the way, okay, you didn't call up within 10 minutes of their start time. We're sorry, just because we're going to take your property, you have no right even to speak in a public hearing. There you go. Good system, good system.
So, welcome to Montgomery County democracy here. Anyway, so the Transit Task Force over the summer explored a number of different variations on how it could then pay back the bonds that it is selling and essentially borrowing money to build all of this and buy the vehicles and all this kind of stuff. And so the first scenario or plan that they looked at was funding all of this strictly through a property tax that would, as they say, overlay the existing county taxes, because that's one of the capabilities of having an ITA is that it is what's called an overlay tax or overlapping debt. So even though the county has limits on how much it can borrow and has limits on how much it can increase its operating budget and whatnot, this is on top of all of that. It's also on top of that, we already have a special taxing district for mass transit that that amount was recently raised from 4 cents
to 6 cents per $100 of assessed value. It was on the thing. Apparently a lot of people, including the mass transit people, didn't realize the tax was raised. And when you start asking them questions, how come they got all this money and are operating with a huge surplus, that they didn't seem to know it existed. So it's just amazing.
The special mass transit district tax in the county, it's county-wide, raises $173 million a year. So, and that basically funds ride-on and what goes to the county to Wilmot. Yes, sir.
Say that again, that the regular transit, mass transit tax that's in your property tax went
yes.
up already?
Yes.
From 4% to
from
4 cents per $100 of assessed value to 6 cents per $100 of assessed value.
But the total tax still stayed within the...
It stayed roughly the same. It's just they reallocated a portion of the tax.
Rebalanced it out.
Yeah.
What did they reallocate from to get the extra 2
They theoretically lowered your property tax for general government purposes and increased it for mass transit purposes.
I just want to mention that a long time ago, like more than 10 years ago, they used to actually break out on your tax bill. There was the county tax, county property tax, and then there was they called it like special tax or something. It had all those, like the mass transit tax and so forth. And then they stopped breaking that out so that you wouldn't have to go to work knowing.
It makes it easier for you to read the bill. We've tried to simplify the bill to make it easier for the residents to do it. But meanwhile, now this year they're running with a significant surplus, and myself, Jim, and some of the Transportation Committee members met with Ike Leggett and Tom Street and Al Rushdie and Joy Newmy on Thursday to discuss some of this stuff. They initially seemed to be arguing with us about this increase in tax, and I'm not sure that even these people at the meeting fully understood that the mass transit tax was increased from 4 to 6 cents. And we asked them about this surplus, and they kept insisting, well, it's not really a surplus because the part of this is to reimburse the county. They reimburse the county for all the capital expenditures they've made on the ride-on buses in the past. And we asked them the question, well, do you do the same for all the capital expenditures we made for the public school system? And apparently public school systems do not reimburse them for this same thing, so we couldn't quite get an answer from either the transportation people or the other people at the meeting.
And maybe this is a good moment to point out that today is the first day of a freeze in public school expenditures because for some reason they don't think they'll have enough money for next year. So now, any position that becomes vacant, if it's a classroom position, will be filled by a long-term substitute, and if it's an out-of-classroom position, it will not be filled at all. So if your counselor retires in the middle of the year, you won't have a counselor. And if your pupil personnel worker retires in the middle of the year, you won't have a pupil personnel worker.
Thank you. I was not even aware of this happening today.
So, in addition to the property tax, because the task force is aware that probably dumping all of this expense on solely the property tax would be politically unpopular. Things that it looked at was creating caps on how much it could increase in a given year on this, as well as alternatives to the property tax. So the two things that were considered here was asking to create an excise tax that would basically be on the right to rent property. So that would mean like apartment buildings, shopping centers, places where businesses rent their facility and whatnot. And it would be 30 cents per square foot for that. One of the concerns, I guess, that has been identified in some of the discussion about this is that many large employers like United Therapeutics, Discovery Channel, Verizon, even Target and Broad Birch Road own the properties that they're on. So they wouldn't be subject to the excise tax. So again, it would mainly affect apartment buildings and shopping center developments and those kinds of things, mainly as far as that. Also was asking the state for permission to have a local sales tax, the 5-cent sales tax.
A half a cent. We have some questions.
I have a question on renting property. What about homeowners who rent out their home, condominium owners who rent out their condominium?
What they've said at the Transit Task Force, that it would not apply to single-family homes that are rented out, and it would not apply to any individual thing, because as a condominium owner, the building isn't renting to you, you're just sub-renting, and apparently this is one of the rules.
You're not sub-renting because you own it.
Yeah, you own it, but you yourself, you're not leasing a whole building. It's not a multi. Now, if you had 3 or more apartments, you probably would be subject to.
And what if you have 3 or more apartments within individual buildings, not in the same building?
No, they're multifamily buildings.
They've defined it at the moment of multifamily buildings, but as we know, any tax that's started could easily be
But a condominium is a
increased.
multifamily building.
No, it's not.
It's not.
It's single member, single.
It has to be considered commercial property,
Yeah.
and they consider multifamily rental buildings as commercial
Gotcha.
property.
Okay.
Yeah.
But as you see, it's complicated.
Gotcha.
Just want to make sure I understand this. The real estate, the property taxes for all kinds of real estate, right? Commercial, industrial, residential?
Yes,
Okay. And the excise tax is for leased properties
correct.
only.
Right.
Yeah, you could have another read on this. I mean, in a way, 15 years ago, they developed, I think you made reference to this, developers had to pay a development fee that represented the additional transportation costs their developments generate.
Well,
Well, I'm just going to say, but that was really never implemented. In fact, if you look at development fees over the last 15 years, they haven't moved an inch, but the amount of development is massive. So what is it that's replaced that? Our plans to build transport. And the fact that they're plans means that all of these developers have been exempted from paying these development fees.
Yeah.
So we basically have shifted the burden of paying for transportation congestion to property owners.
Current property
Directly.
owners, yeah.
Yeah.
That
And
was
the
what they've done.
one slight clawback is this excise tax.
Yeah.
That's kind of a very clumsy instrument for getting at some of the real estate developers' profits.
But at the moment, the way real estate taxes work, they'll admit that 75% of the real estate taxes come from residential owners.
So
And
that
25% come from the commercial developments. And with the 20% vacancies we now have in office buildings, every office building that has any quantity of vacancies appeals their assessment. And in many cases, you could have a large office building literally being half empty and literally paying less real estate taxes than a single family owner in an average home, which is assessed at $440,000. So this is just how can we basically, the way we see it, is how can we tax the existing homeowners who probably won't live within walking distance of these BRT routes, and will basically have, no benefit to it other than, oh yes, this will reduce congestion on Rockwell Pike, it will reduce congestion on Beers Mill Road, and it will reduce congestion on 29. We actually think that if what they do to Rockwell Pike will basically destroy Rockwell Pike, and once you get rid of all the shopping on Rockwell Pike, there'll be very little traffic on Rockwell Pike.
Rich,
Great discussion, and I just want to correct one misstatement. Impact taxes are still in place. They are still among the highest in the country here in this jurisdiction. Developers pay millions of dollars per development for impact taxes. So there was an assumption that those taxes had somehow gone away. They have not. They remain in effect. The problem is there's about a 30-year backlog of underinvestment in transportation infrastructure here in this region. And we're dealing with that legacy because we have not been keeping up. When times were flush and we had capital dollars to spend, we didn't put them into infrastructure. And we are paying the price for that. There's a huge backlog of infrastructure, public infrastructure, that never got built, both on the road side and on the transit side. But I just didn't want anyone to thinking developers aren't still paying impact taxes, because they are. When you hear the developers complain about it, it's
No,
exorbitant.
we got a presentation from Montgomery County's Director of Finance, and he showed us the figures for the last decade, and it's a flat line. It's not zero.
Because there's very
It's
little
a
new
flat-
development happening now, especially since 2008. The pace of development here has slowed to
This
almost
is a
nothing.
decade's worth.
But these fees per development, the fees for the development that is happening are quite high compared to other jurisdictions. There's just very little development happening in
Harriet?
I just want to mention, we have a resolution on the subject at the end of the meeting, if you want to stick around, but I would just say that some developers are paying impact taxes, but not everywhere. There are lots of exemptions, but I think we should, but I
If
just
they
wanted
made
to,
those fees are not there, that's not.
I just wanted to clarify, the excise tax is to pay for the operations costs, not the capital cost, as well as the proposed sales tax. But the capital costs would be funded solely by property tax.
Sorry, Harry, the last meeting, that was what it was characterized in the charts, but in the actual text of the task force report, it's either or, operating or capital for these taxes. They wouldn't commit to either. So that's going on. Anyway, just to let you know that what the task force did was look at all kinds of variations between property tax, excise, sales tax. They even did a scenario where the state and federal governments would somehow bequeath $40 million a year to us for life, putting the Publishers Clearinghouse these days, I guess. So thereby defraying the amount that taxpayers would have to pay if that $40 million sort of came over the transom at us and whatnot. But there's no clear identification of what that actual source might be from either the state or the feds to provide that kind of money. Currently, the state does provide $40 million a year for write-off, so that's one thing we get. The other main thing here is that when this was originally proposed, there was a lot of opposition by the McGeo County Employees Union to this whole thing being possibly moved out to the ITA. The understanding that has been reached is that the write-on staff will remain county employees, but would be supervised and overseen by the ITA management. No decision was made as far as the future BRT staff, what their situation or status would be as far as the unions and things. So we're sort of dealing with all of this, and the big thing I would point out is at the very top that all these specific details are subject to change depending upon what actually gets passed by the state legislature in the enabling legislation, as well as what the council does when it actually, or if it does, create this thing. So all of this is somewhat in a state of flux. Yes?
Just, it sounds like things have been going very fast. But I think that you said something about your opinion it would destroy Rockville Pike commercially.
Sure.
Well, basically, if you looked at the proposal, their proposal is having buses down the median, which means the center of the Rockville Pike. Their proposal currently is taking away, and I'll basically talk about Rockville Pike from White Flint all the way up to Milestone, which is pretty far north. Basically, once you put something down a median, you basically, their intent currently, they said, admit is basically if there's no signal at the intersection, they will prohibit the left turns. But what happens is that if you look at the traffic counts on Rockville Pike, almost no one goes straight up and down Rockville Pike. They go a few blocks and they turn left and they turn right. And if you want to go into some of the shopping centers, you'd have to make a left turn. And basically, as soon as you start messing with the median, you basically eliminate a significant number of right turns. In addition to getting rid of one lane in each traffic, and then they say, well, then make 2 lanes, which will make the left turn, so that means you're down to 1 lane of traffic on the Pike. That was Rockville Pike in the good old days when my mother was young, back in the 1930s, when Rockville Pike was 1 lane in each direction. And the northern end of Rockville Pike is still currently 1 lane, basically north of the Milestone Shopping Center up to Clarksburg. There they have plenty of room to widen it. But down here, basically, after you stop permitting left turns, and I've just seen the amount of traffic, right now you can't even always make a left turn, and it often backs up the left lane of the traffic. And basically, if you look at Rockville Pike, and I, as a person doing this, had decided a couple of, maybe 6 weeks ago, to ride the entire length of Rockville Pike. And you'll see many intersections. there's concrete where you have a left turn, and it immediately switches over to make for the next person making a left turn in the other direction. So basically, once you put it down the median, you're going to mess up traffic. If people like myself, and where I live, I can get to Tyson's faster than I can probably drive on the Pike once they do the work. I can either stay in Maryland and try to get on the Pike to go shopping, or I say, give up. I go to Amazon, which means the stores don't get the business. I then drive to Tyson's. We don't get the sales tax. The stores don't go to business. They go out of business. And then Rockville Pike will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. There will be very little traffic on Rockville Pike.
Well, there is a way. I know that the city that I hate to go to is Boston, where they have a similar situation where there's medians down the middle. You can't make a left turn because my son went to college there, it was nuts. But what you had to do is you made a right turn into an egress, then like a transit to then make a left turn. So cars would feed into the right lane to make an overpass to go to those shopping centers. So it wasn't like you couldn't get to the shopping center, just that you can't get it by making what we know as a standard left turn. You have to make a right to make a left.
This whole thing is distorted because there's a lot of options being considered by the CAC. The median's only one of many options, and they got to address the left turns.
Can I suggest we hear the rest of the presentation? We're having some good discussions, but I would like to hear the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, unfortunately, I got a few slides to go through here. Some of the things you ought to be aware of is that the sort of international experts on BRT is the Institute for Transportation Development Policy. They had a rather long-winded statement regarding implementation here, which I thought is important, particularly given the Council President's statement today, George Leventhal, about probably there being an incremental implementation of these projects that the this is all that text printed on a sheet of paper, so you don't have to try and strain your eyes, or at least I'd have to strain my eyes. But they say, as a practical matter of public administration, however, Montgomery County has limited experience with managing projects of the scope, scale, and complexity. Developing even one BRT corridor will be an administrative challenge in Montgomery County, let alone an attempt to develop and deliver multiple corridors simultaneously, a task no other municipality has ever attempted. So they're urging caution about trying to do all these things at the same time. Furthermore, they say the BRT system design decisions and phasing must start from the basis of existing bus ridership, even if land use changes over time are also considered. This is critical as the base of ridership will continue to make up the majority of the ridership for many years after system opening. A BRT system that opens with no riders will be viewed as a failure. Even a transit-oriented development occurs and the ridership grows over the years. Put another way, if a lane is taken away from traffic and dedicated to BRT in the corridor transformation, that lane will either remain empty until ridership materializes, something that will be distasteful. Car drivers who have lost their lane will be full of empty buses, something that will have significant cost ramifications to the system. Along those same lines, the Countywide Transit Corridors Master Plan said since a large part of the initial ridership for BRT service will come from existing transit users, those numbers do not warrant a high level, whose numbers do not warrant a high level of treatment at this time. It is likely that there will be an incremental introduction of priority treatments and features that with annual operating ridership experience ultimately lead to the maximum level of treatment appropriate for the specific corridor in question. So one of the issues here is, again, the considerable expense that we're looking at. Is there going to be sufficient demand for that kind of capacity? That what we're talking here are BRT vehicles. They're 60 feet long. They are long articulated buses, have a capacity of holding up to 100 passengers. And the theory here is that you'll have one of these buses going up and down every 5 minutes during rush hour and every 10 minutes during non-rush hour. So, yeah.
I'm a newbie at this, and I'm not quite understanding. There's a subway line that goes along from Friendship Heights all the way up to Shady Grove, basically along the Rockville Pike.
Really?
Why in the world do we need bus rapid transit to mirror or to follow the subway?
There's the belief that there's going to be sufficient demand for having both services, and that there are only a limited number of metro stops, and so this will allow some additional stops. But Jerry?
Well, the proposal from Rockville South is to add 7 additional stops. For $1 billion, it's a pretty good deal, I think, for the developers, for the people building the system, for Parsons Brinckerhoff, who's making some good money building the Silver Spring Metro Center. They can't explain it to us, and what they're doing at the moment, in fact, in our area, they've just proposed elimination of the feeder bus to get there, because that didn't have enough ridership on it. This is a bus that runs from Montgomery Mall through our neighborhoods to White Link. And their argument for getting rid of that, and they've actually said in writing that they want to eliminate every ride-on bus that has less than 10 riders per trip. That means they're proposing to get rid of 22 of the 78 routes that they have. So this makes full sense, and I think what they've said in some of these meetings is the only way for them, people in the meetings, to have control is for them to do it totally on their own. We see WMATA ridership, and we've studied it. We've given these facts and figures to anyone who's asked for it, and we've seen the ridership on the metro on the red line on our side, other than people leaving the county, is very small. If you add this total sum of the metro line and the ride-on bus service, and that's where we're going to get to our punchline later on, of recommending basically free ride-on service, which most people who are not in a hurry and want to save some money could actually use a free ride-on bus service that will stop. It might take them 7 to 10 minutes longer to do this route, but on Rockville Pike and every other route, for far cheaper, can have free ride-on service, which would attract a lot more riders. And then maybe if we do have a critical mass, we will determine we have it. The county also has a proposal on Rockville Pike for putting on a ride-on plus service.
Get that.
Which will actually be only $21 million instead of $1.2 billion, which will do the exact same thing, but it won't be quite as fancy. So some of the people who insist on only running on fancy buses and not plain 40-foot buses wouldn't be that happy. And they're going to have Wi-Fi service on there. They'll have fancy bus stops, so when you wait an hour and a half for the bus, it'll be nice to wait it.
Okay. So, budgetary tax impacts that we're looking at here. Give you a quick summary from the table I showed you before. Estimated capital costs for phase 1 for the currently spending projects would be $2.3 billion. Future projects would be another $3.3 billion. Estimated annual operating costs for these phase 1 projects, $93 million. For the currently spending projects, another $125.4 million a year operating costs for the future routes. In context, like I said, the entire county ride-on service is about $173 million, or yeah, 126. Okay.
126 million.
Yeah, depending on where you look, it's either 126 million or 136 million. But anyway, compared to this is service for 4 BRT routes. The County Department of Finance, in their information to residents and whatnot, does this comparison that for every $10 million borrowed adds $1 million in debt service to the county operating budget. And what they show you here is what you might be able to buy for that $1 million in debt service. Might be of your interest here: 13 public school teachers, 9 police officers, 9 firefighters, operate 1 library for a year, operate 5 rec centers for a year, etc., etc., etc. That $1 million could be buying instead of just paying debt. The other thing that the county executive repeatedly says in a lot of his presentations is that debt service is the 3rd highest expense in the county operating budget right now, or $367.6 million, or 7.2% of the total budget. The analogy I use here, guys, is if you have a credit card and you rack up a big bill so that in your monthly expenses you're paying interest on your credit card debt. If you're paying interest, you're not paying for groceries, you're not paying for rent, you're not paying for all the kind of other consumables and other things that you have as normal expenses. So a lot of your money is going out the door as interest.
I'm not an advocate for debt, but I think you're bad-mouthing the county. The idea of a 10% interest rate in an era of,
It's not.
our current interest.
No, that is not interest, that's capital, you gotta pay back the $10 million over a period, normally the county issues 20-year bonds. So there's $500,000 worth of principal you have to pay, plus interest in the current county thing. The latest I've gotten from the county, which was dated Friday, which is gonna be in a county council hearing used tomorrow, is they're assuming a 5% interest rate on county bonds. So when you have the debt service over 20 years.
Isn't that kind of high too in the current?
Well, this is the
market?
county's estimate, but everyone thinks that the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates in the next few months. And they're planning for the future, so this is what the county has stated to use a 5%. It might be 4%, it might be a little bit less.
And it might also be 2% or 1.5%.
No, we've never gotten that low, we've never gotten that low.
For a tax-free bond?
Never gotten that low. If you can do them, the county would be glad to take a couple of $100 million from you at 1.5%. If you want to loan it to them, I can speak to Joe Beach, and we'll do a private financing.
So anyway, that's the idea here, that when we borrow money, it also then takes money away from the operating budget that could be going to current expenses, personnel, other kinds of things here. Impacts of county taxpayers with just the current BRT projects, the 4 projects, for an average $440,000 assessed value home, you're talking about $381.
This is what they state, not reality.
Yeah. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, this is what the county is saying the maximum. When I do my calculations, and I'm a CPA by trade, I've advised numerous people on mortgages, and when you use Excel and how much a payment is, and use the interest rate of 5%, use a 20-year bond, they're talking about 30-year bonds, and you can keep lowering it, but if you do an honest calculation, you're dealing with significantly more money than this. And this is assuming no cost overruns, that we will not replace buses every 10 years, even though they wear out. And it's making a whole series of assumptions which we consider fairly thing. They're saying this is the maximum cost. We don't think they're going to be correct. We could be wrong. I guarantee you any calculations I do on bond rates, predicting interest rates in the future will be wrong. In fact, even Janet Yellen from the Federal Reserve could not tell you what interest rates will be at the end of the year.
In addition to that, if the county does decide to do the future BRT projects, there'll be similar kinds of increases, but who knows in terms of those other pending 5 BRT routes, what actually gets built, if it's multi-phased or whatever else. So it's kind of hard to figure out what that impact might be. In addition, as you may be aware, that the county executive announced in July or June, whatnot, that the current county operating budget that started July 1st, we were expecting revenue shortfalls of about $50 million. So the council was then asked to do a cost savings plan to cut about $54 million in expenses in the current budget that just started. However, the county executive in his memo transmitting this information said that the next fiscal year, which would be starting July 1st, 2016, he's expecting $174 million revenue shortfall. And so he's saying there are significant either tax increases, spending cuts, or whatever else. And so his transmittal memo said about the possibility of a 10% plus property tax increase just to maintain current spending levels. So we would have that possibility to deal with, plus also additional taxes that would be coming through the ITA. So there's a lot of things happening simultaneously here that we should be aware of, that these things are not single occurrences, but that there are some major changes possibly in taxes here in the county. One of the things to be aware of, this is information based on IRS returns and migration data. From year to year, the number of people that have as their return address on their tax returns and where they're living. And so what has been going on here is that in the state of Maryland, Montgomery, Prince George's, and Baltimore cities and counties have been losing taxpayers. This is showing for the years 2012, 2013, where this chart on the side here, that we lost about 21,000 taxpayers in that 1 year. The chart over here, the very, very tiny print shows that it's about $1.5 billion in wealth that left the state. And this is going from 1988 to 2012, that this has been an ongoing trend in Montgomery County. First, it was just declining increases in taxpayers, and then in 2003, we started going negative. And since 2003, each year, we've continued to lose more and more taxpayers. The people coming into the county are coming from places like DC, Prince George's County, Charles County, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. The places that we're losing taxpayers to are Howard County, Frederick County, Fairfax County, Anne Arundel, and Loudoun County. So the largest number of taxpayers are going to adjacent counties in the immediate area. It's not people that are fleeing to Florida for retirement or whatever. Yes.
When you say taxpayers, are you meaning across all kinds of incomes, or are these rich people being replaced?
It's anybody who files a federal tax return. So this is IRS data that just simply shows the counts of people from year to year that have filed a federal return.
Other data has shown that we're basically losing more of the richer people. The poorer people, or people who don't pay any income tax, are not measured. If you don't file a tax return, you're too poor to file a tax return, you're not measured. So a quantity of our population, if you use all the figures available, shows that we're gaining people who pay no income tax, and we're losing people on the whole who pay significant amounts of income tax.
There's comparable data that shows for 6 years from 2007 to 13, the average person in the county got about $700 to $800 less in pay, which goes with what you're saying.
That's the same.
Same thing. So what's happening is the number of rich people getting really good pay is going down, and the number of people at the bottom level working at fast food is not going up, and these guys don't pay taxes. So that's what's happening. So,
Yeah, just along those lines, I happen to be talking to just a developer I know who is relevant to all this, and he said one of the issue when we talk about increasing county employment, he said that developers can build or anticipate building, commercial office building type property, but it's the employers who hold the veto of actually moving in. And he said the problem is Montgomery County is perceived by employers as being anti-business. And so what happens is, and as I've got into this, is that if what you're doing is threatening or tax increases of various sorts, and you're not totally looking at the cost effectiveness depending of various alternatives, what you could do with the money, the impression of the county as being business unfriendly compared to other metro jurisdictions just grows, and so no matter what the developers might want to do, those office buildings remain empty, it doesn't accomplish very much.
Right.
And so one of the things, and I didn't start out feeling this way, but I got involved in my community for a very narrow reason, which was 355 inside the Beltway where our community is located. Got more and more involved in this, the more and more you saw that this whole process hasn't really pushed down hard what is the most cost-effective solution we can have with the least possible money, and can we put those transportation dollars into other things that people elsewhere regard as smart. That process in the IT isn't occurring. It's not that they're bad decisions, and I know people like Dan Wilhelm have been involved in this, but the world we live in today is not, for a whole range of reasons, the world that existed 3 years ago. But we know a lot more than we did 3 years ago about where people are working, how they work, what's going on, intelligent vehicle systems. Other places regard the future as a plus. The task force process has said, if you say intelligent vehicles, they'll say, no, it's not going to happen. Other people in New York City, is very progressive jurisdictions, are getting grant money on how to do this, and the county is just this process is frightened of the future because they have a vision that's 3 years old. And today's a 3-year-old vision is just out of date. We should welcome the possibility, you know, of looking forward, not defending the past.
One of the things that we can look at is the Maryland Department of Labor and Licensing puts out figures every year by the average annual number of employees that are employed in the county. We see that in 2005 we had a total employment of 458,668 people. By year 2014, it literally decreased by 3,325 to 455,000. But if you look at, we actually lost 14,959 private jobs, but our gain in local government employees was 4,760. So we can say that Montgomery County has been doing a good job of increasing the local number of employees that we have. And if we project these trends out, we have no economic growth over the next 25 years. Because if we've lost this many people over 10 years, just doing a simple straight line means we'll lose more people over the next 25 years.
To their credit, Nancy here and Rich Parsons at the task force meetings proposed that the county adopt a similar approach as Northern Virginia does in terms of prioritizing transportation projects, evaluating them against cost-benefit analysis to determine which of the proposed projects merits priority funding and whatnot. And the Transit Task Force said, no, we want to do everything, and we want to do it all. So, Rich, did you?
Yeah, that's a...
Rich, why don't you come up so people can hear you better?
It goes to the gentleman's excellent point. I've been involved in 5 major projects in this region: the Wilson Bridge replacement, the Addison Road extension of the Blue Line, the Purple Line. I'm one of the founding members of Purple Line now, and the Quarter Cities Transaway. In each case, you had a multi-billion-dollar investment of taxpayer money. In each case, it had to go through a formal alternatives analysis, where by law they were required, because all of these projects had an element of federal funding, to go through and test the expenditure, the effectiveness data on all kinds of different metrics for each project compared to a no-build scenario in which you just did everything in the constrained long-range plan and made no changes, and then every prudent and feasible alternative to the project. And in every case, they had to go through a rigorous analysis, exactly like the gentleman described. The ITA proposal has come out because a lot of people in county government just decided that bus rapid transit was the way to go and was worth $2 billion of expenditure and increasing everyone's taxes by $400 a year for the next 30 years. Now, I'm a big fan of bus rapid transit. I think it's got great applications. The Quarter Cities Transaway, I think, is going to be a great application of true BRT. It's got its own dedicated right-of-way, and it's been through this competitive cost analysis process. So we know it's more effective than the other alternatives. And the CCT, I can say to you in good conscience, is a very good application of bus rapid transit, and it will be an effective use of our taxpayer dollars. The rest of the system has never been exposed to that analysis to see, and typically when a community contemplates investing $2.4 billion, whatever the price tag is now, I know it's gone up, but over $2 billion of our tax money, typically a process where scenarios will be developed and tested against one another using some of the very sophisticated modeling tools that we have to maintain public confidence that those dollars are being invested in the best possible system for the money. That's what the business community wants to see in order to invest here. That's what residents want to see in order to feel good about the taxes that we pay, which are not low. You know, and that process has not been done, incredibly, for this ITA process and for the bus rapid transit. When Nancy and I proposed this, and several others proposed it, the task force basically said, no, we don't need to. We know this is best. Just, you know, we know more than everyone else that's looked at this. And I'll end by, 3 years ago, I was involved in a study that surveyed 60 top transportation experts from all different disciplines all over the Washington region. Just in an open-ended format, we asked them, what are the half dozen or dozen most important investments in each part of this region over the next 30 years? Not one of them said local level BRT. Not one out of 60. Several of them mentioned investing more in metro. Several of them mentioned the CCT specifically, and several of them mentioned the Purple Line. Several of them mentioned regional bus rapid transit, connecting Tysons to Montgomery County, or Frederick to this life science center that the CCT will serve. Several of them talked about regional connectivity because that's where the travel patterns are. None of them mentioned local bus rapid transit networks as the most cost-effective use of scarce dollars now. So I just want to hit this point. We've not done the work that every other jurisdiction would do when contemplating spending this much money on something to just make sure this is the best and highest priority use of those funds. And absent of that, our organization is not prepared to support this because that analysis has not been done.
Thanks, Rich.
When I first brought this, I brought the Northern Virginia Transit Authority to the attention of the task force during the last testimony, and the purpose was also similar to the Harris one. The Northern Virginia is an evaluative planning body, and it really, in order to prioritize things, it also does gap analysis. Would a project fill in, or would it be overinvestment? And we tried to bring this up, but this task force was their focus is predetermined. I gave the name of the woman who did the presentation about the Northern Virginia Transit Authority at the Transportation Planning Board, where I'm also a CAC member. I said, why don't you invite this person here? You have the opportunity to compare two standing ITAs locally, WMATA, which is a dysfunctional ITA, and Northern Virginia, which is a highly functional, very effective ITA. They never followed through on this. There was no internal comparison of how these examples, what would be best practices, what would be lessons learned.
So, sorry guys, we're running out of time here. A little bit of hurry up, or we're going to kick that.
Just one connection to this, which is the absence of alternatives analysis effectively means that the county can never get federal funds, cannot get grants, because the basic part of the BFUD is alternatives analysis. So them proceeding this way means that that scenario is meaningless in the county.
Right. But anyway, just quickly, the trend across the country are these kinds of mega projects that are being canceled all over the place. Chicago canceled a BRT that was being planned for there. We know things like the Arlington streetcar system that got canned. DC's streetcar network got canned, except for the one that got built. Nashville. Anyway, so this is what's happening, that these projects are being considered too expensive, take too long. Alternatives. What else can be done? Lots of stuff. There are alternatives that are more affordable, more immediate, and more appropriate to the county's transportation needs. Examples of alternatives here: enhanced express bus service. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Data-driven improvements in existing transit resources. Explore potential for on-demand bus and car sharing services to supplement mass transit. Implement real-time computer traffic signal controls. Implement positive congestion pricing, and provide free transit fares that Jerry's talked about. One of the things that I mentioned before was the Metro or WMATA K9 service on New Hampshire Avenue. What that is a limited stop express service that basically travels in mixed traffic. What WMATA is proposing also is doing that on Veers Mill Road and Route 29 with implementations very shortly. And the nice thing about WMATA is that basically it's not a direct expense of the county. In addition, the County Department of Transportation is proposing a similar service to WMATA's express service on Rockville Pike called Ride On Plus. They've applied to the feds for a $17 million grant, which means that the county would have to only kick in $4 million to build the thing, and it would cost us about $6 million a year to operate. So what we've done here are capital cost comparisons between the various BRTs, the CCT, the Purple Line versus the Metro Extra, Ride On Plus, and the CCT Purple Line, and you can see significant differodences in the capital costs if you go with the Metro Extra Ride On Plus services on the three roadways that are now being considered for the full-on BRT. Financing, again, pretty dramatic differences between going it alone and financing everything through county taxes versus having WMATA pay for the service and the feds do the grant to build the Ride On Plus. Operating costs, again, which would you rather pay? that for having various BRT services versus services that are being provided by WMATA and the Ride On Plus service. The comparisons between the Metro Extra kind of service and VRT is that the Metro Extra service carries roughly 2/3 of the same number of passengers per hour, because of course they're using 40-foot buses instead of 60-foot buses. In terms of densities of the community served, as far as offices or residential, it's roughly the same between the two. The Metro Extra service and